Yes, so we're coming back to Carney's speech. So I think going further in his speech, he talks about, I think, in his view, a very core problem in that recent threats, shall we say, from Trump have revealed in the international system, and that's the danger of extreme global integration to these countries that previously played along in this world order, of which Canada is, of course, one of them. And I think Carney, he does have quite a bit of he is quite able, and he does see things rather clearly. I don't know if it's him or his advisors or his team, but I think I personally did not think of global integration as the main risk or the main lesson to take away um, from what's happening on the world stage. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good, pretty acute observation to single out extreme global integration as a risk that the crisis had the recent events have shown and laid bare is the language he uses. Um, and so he points out the issue, and then he points out the issue, and then he basically discusses a way forward. And the way forward is not for every country to fend for themselves, to build fortresses, but rather to unite. And I think at this point, his message is so he started with the Pavel analogy, and the sign was "Workers of the world unite." And I think his message is like I thought a good way of putting it would be, middle powers of the world unite. I think that's what he wants.
Mm.
Um, because when, as he says here, when well, he doesn't say it here, but in his speech he says basically, if single countries negotiate with a hegemon, then single countries negotiate from subordination or from places of weaknesses. But when countries unite, middle powers unite, then they're able to at least communicate and negotiate on more equal terms, and perhaps have a take. I think he said something like taking a third path with impact, and yeah, that's basically it. I think there's another picture on this slide.
Wait. Yes.
Yes. Um, So that's basically what he calls on middle powers to do, to make collective investments and to build coalitions that work issue by issue. And yeah, and
Wait.
he even gave no, I think this page isn't really that important. I think like the two pages are, so this page is basically about he basically laid out the issue that he thought what he thought what the issue was, which is extreme economic integration. And then he talks about what middle powers should do, and these are the things on the right. And also the next page is like about what middle powers should do. And yeah, I think, and he gave theoretical framework, or at least the theoretical framing for this, which is values-based realism. Um, and he called on countries to unite and build coalitions. And I think diversifying is also a very important thing. And I think this leads me to a takeaway, which is, one, I would say, pretty big winner of the last few months is probably China, because on the one hand, China was able to stand strong against Trump's initial tariffs during his Liberation Day tariffs. There was a back and forth tariff war, and I think China fared quite well. And the other thing is, countries, especially Western countries, are, I would say, increasingly seeing the United States as not such a reliable partner, and seeing the need to diversify and engage further with China, who generally, I would say, just wants to do business. So in the past year alone, I think 3 of the G7 leaders have visited, and Frederick Merz is coming to China very soon. And And I think generally it's been quite a good year for China. Also, the United
Wait,
Kingdom recently allowed China.
is Carney visiting China right now, or
No, he's not visiting China. He visited in the past,
or is it? Wait, then who's
like
visiting China right now?
I think the Uruguayan prime minister president is in China right now. I'm not sure. But Carney visited
Oh,
China in January, I think.
well, I must get
Before,
outdated news, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Carney is
Oh,
not in China.
yeah. Now remember seeing that Carney visited China in Jan. Okay.
Yeah, he visited in January, and I think Macron visited last year, and Keir Starmer also visited recently. I tried to find him in Shanghai, but I didn't, which was quite sad.
Mm.
But yeah, and so I think China has gained quite a bit from this, and also, for example, the United Kingdom recently allowed China to build its new embassy in London, and I think that has quite a bit of symbolic meaning. So I think yeah, I think one winner from what Trump has been doing recently is probably China. I don't think that's the result he wanted, but um, I think Trump's stance toward China is also quite interesting. Like on the one hand, he wants good relationships with the president personally and also with China as a whole. But on the other hand, he's also very like he just changes a lot. It's yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So like he mentions that the multilateral institutions are under threat. So do you think the threat is like per se like Trump's threat, or is it like some broader structural threat?
I think the most direct threat is of course, Trump's threat. A more
Mm-hmm.
structural threat, I think it would be perhaps like we discussed before, turning like a general turning away from these international values in American society.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, how long Trumpism lasts after Trump, and I mean, I personally don't have an answer to that, but I think that's probably the structural issue because I don't think like Europe wants to end this structure, this order, and I don't think there's really another power that is looking to affront or destroy the power. Like, I don't think any country is wanting to do that. So I think the obvious direct threat is Trump, but I think structurally, if there is one, it would be structurally. Then I think the UN has many issues structurally. It's not a very
Mm-hmm.
competent and effective organization.
Yeah, I was
Um,
also
yeah.
very like surprised when he like mentioned the COP, because I thought like the COP plays a much lesser role on the international stage compared to the two institutions before. So yeah.
I think it's because maybe he likes climate change, so he like
Yeah, maybe we could argue this way.
actively.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think like Carney is not only like speaking against Trump per se, I think he's kind of also hinting like how he's like being kind of like Trump did expose some of like the greatest like
Yeah,
uh disadvantages of like globalization, how countries lost their sovereignty and autonomy when they rely on others too much. And it might be fine when they are like working together, but it certainly adds a lot of uncertainty when like your allies are turning away from you. So yeah, that's why I saw it.
yeah. I get that. I think that's a very good point. Um, I think Carney also he was not only talking about Trump, but also like the many issues with the global order and the various institutions he named here that have been exposed with what Trump has been doing recently. And I think Carney probably wants to change that as well, but I think it's probably very difficult to do, especially the UN. Like
Yeah.
in my Notre Dame leadership seminar, uh,
Okay.
uh, essay, there's a question about the UN and how it's doing, and yeah, it's not really doing very well. And I was thinking about like, they asked me how I think the question was like how the UN can improve, and personally, I don't think there's any way for the UN to improve with the current structure because there's just not anything they can do. Um, especially when strong powers are acting against international law, there's just nothing the UN can do. Like
Yeah.
only in cases where the war and suffering is abundantly clear and also politically insensitive, can the UN do anything? For example, in many countries in Africa, for example, I think in the DRC,
Mm-hmm.
in Sudan, maybe, only in these cases can the UN do anything. And of course, it's good that they're doing things, but in cases where either there are differences between, especially the Security Council members, and when things are like politically sensitive, nobody can do anything, right? The UN can't
Yeah.
stop the war in Ukraine. The UN can't protect Greenland if something happens. The UN can't stop what the UN the UN can't stop Maduro being captured. It can't really do anything. Um, Especially when strong powers are involved. So I personally am very pessimistic about the UN's future. I don't think it can do much.
Yeah, so I kind of also see a paradox here. Like he has been criticizing about integration and globalization, about all those stuff. But what he is saying that we should cure the threats and the insecurities and the uncertainties from global integration and globalization by further global integration with like middle powers. So do you see the paradox here, or?
Hmm. I think middle powers, yeah, he is calling for more integration and closer cooperation among middle powers, but I think it's on the one hand, of course, middle powers are, I think he's imagining that middle powers can unite and as like a union, combat hegemonies to look out for their national interests. But I think on the other hand, middle powers are like, um, they're more means of an end, which is diversification, meaning that he wants to cooperate more with middle powers, so that he's integrated with more people or more countries. So even if, for example, his one partner, the United States, doesn't start threatening him, he can turn to his other partners, and basically, even if like a lot of partners are turning against him, there's going to be somebody, if he hasn't sufficient amount of friends, there's going to be some countries that are still going to be able to work with him, and he's still going to be able to survive as a country.
Yeah, I
Um,
do agree. So yeah, not really sure why he mentions the risk of integration here. So, but anyways.
mm, I mean, I think it's probably an understanding they've come to in their cabinet discussions in Canada. They're thinking like, oh, the US just sanctioned us, and yeah, we can't really do much against it, so it's not very good. And it's all because the US and Canadian economies are so integrated, and the
Yeah.
United States has leverage in that relationship.
Yeah, and I also think like other like the so-called middle powers also has a risk of like a populist or radically right-wing party of gaining control of the government. Although I think it is certainly less likely than US. So I do wonder like what will like Carney say when such things happen. When yeah.
Yeah, I think if these parties gain power, they're going to be more nationalistic and less internationalistic, and that's what he warned against. Which is, he said, we can't be building fortresses, but rather we need to be uniting the middle powers. So, I mean, he wouldn't be very happy about that, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think that's basically his speech, and we can continue to the next page. And so after I think from a structural standpoint, his speech is quite clear. He, like, for example, after, so he, like, during the middle and the conclusion of his speech, he basically points out the problem, and then tells the world what they can do, tells the world what Canada's doing, and then in the end, he starts advertising Canada, and telling the world that Canada has the resources, it's a good partner, and he ends up on, I think so. I think this whole structure of his speech was quite decent, from a
I
structural
agree.
standpoint. Yeah, and now we can kind of go deeper into these details if you would like. I see you've highlighted certain things.
Mm-hmm. Mm, yeah, I was just wondering. So what do you think is like Carney's like attitude towards NATO? Like, do you think like Carney, like given what Trump has done, like do you think like Carney is still like in support of NATO or something like that?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he needs NATO right now because if the United States, again, it's very unlikely, but like if the United States wants to attack Canada, the only thing that can save Canada, I think, is NATO's Article 5. And if like European countries come to its aid, because I think apart from that, if we were to leave only Canada and the United States in a conflict, then there's no way Canada could survive. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if like United States and Canada is like in a state of conflict, like although I don't think it's very probably,
Yeah, it's probably not going to happen, but like
yeah, but I
if
also like yeah, like I also think like NATO is like very like US centric, so I'm not really sure like if the Europeans are really gonna aid Canada or whatsoever.
oh yeah, I think I heard that. The Supreme Commander of European forces in NATO is American. So
Oh, okay.
I think that's something I read. So yeah, but I think like Carney, I think he generally likes these international organizations because like at least there's some deterrence, maybe some they have like some, especially on previous. Okay, so it's like what I took from the paper. It's called Hypocrisy, U.S. Hypocrisy, and stuff like that. I think it
Mhm.
said that these international institutions, especially in the past, they did play a pretty important role in reining the U.S. in because at least these were like, especially like kind of like for example the UN, it was in the World Trade Organization, things like these, they were um, platforms or avenues for less powerful countries to be able to hold the US accountable more or less and to call out the differences between rhetoric and action and to be able to limit the US somewhat according to the um, the international according to international law, which the U.S. laid out itself.
Mhm.
But of course, now the U.S. doesn't really care that much about international law. I mean, it didn't care much in the past. Like sometimes they disregarded it, but now I'd say more so. But these international organizations, like especially NATO, I think they still have some. They still have like at least some deterrence because
Mhm.
like the possibility of Article 5 really coming into action I would say, does deter the United States from to some extent from trying to attack at least a NATO country because, I
Yeah, I
mean,
agree.
even if it's like unlikely that the other countries come to that certain country's defense, if it does, then it would be quite catastrophic for the US as well because like I don't think, and also for President Trump, honestly, because I don't think the electorate at home in the US really wants a war with like their allies. So I think it
Yeah,
still has some impact.
yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, no, I think Trump, not Trump, Carney, he does lay out what he's done very clearly. I think there was a um speech, not speech, but a speech, yeah, a speech in response by the conservative leader of Canada, Pierre Poilievre, and he
Mhm.
basically took down these points one by one, which was quite interesting. But I don't think that's what Pierre Poilievre should be doing. I think in this moment he should be standing by the Carney government and trying to really help Canada, as opposed to trying to find faults in the Liberal government and try to like continue that political game that they played in the past. Because I think now it's a pretty crucial moment for Canada, and I think they need unity and really to get things done, as opposed to uh, you know political disagreements and stuff like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I actually think that the chance of like US doing anything to Canada is still like very
Yeah,
small. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think the US is going to invade Canada. That's probably not going to happen.
Like, is this a more important time for Canada than let's say like 10 years ago? Maybe, but I I still like it does not like constitute like a substantial like a national security like threat or something like that. That's my take.
Yeah, but I think the Canada still does need to become like it's still I think is quite a crucial moment because the U.S. still has tariffs on Canada and they are negotiating the free trade agreement this year. So I think um, it's all pretty crucial. But yeah, I mean it's not like a matter of life and death for Canada, but I think it's a pretty important moment.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so shall we move on?
Yeah,
Okay. Ah, yeah. So let's see. Like, how is like Kearney faring domestically? So actually, I personally think that how Kearney is faring domestically is like slightly less important as compared to how Trump is faring domestically because Canada does not have a midterm election since they practice a parliamentary system of government, and Carney has just been elected in 2025. So I don't think like looking at the polls right now has much to say about like the chance of maintaining a liberal like government into the next um election. But the point is, Liberal has been government of Canada for quite long. I think since 2010 or something like that. Since Trudeau, right? Yeah.
yes, true.
So I think it is already quite amazing. Like for how long, uh, like like the Liberal can stay in government. Yeah. So
Yeah.
how so? Yeah. So one thing we do notice is that like again, I've put up the CPI for Canada. Canada is not doing wait, this is not the CPI. This is GDP per capita. Sorry, I think yeah, this is a GDP for Canada. Yeah, so Canada is not doing yeah, the graph below is for CPI. So in terms of the GDP, Canada is not doing extremely well, as we can see in the I think it's Q2 of 2025 when the tariff of the Trump's Liberation Day tariff hits. It's pretty tough for them because there is a lot of like economic cooperation between Canada and the United States. They sell a lot of their like first sector product into the United States, and they have extensive cooperation like in the Michigan and the Quebec area where they manufacture cars because due to the NAFTA and the US Mexico and Canada that free trade agreement where they practically eliminated tariff back in times, but as we all know, like the first step of Trump's tariff is to impose them on their like closest like economic allies, Canada and Mexico. So that does hurt for Canada at least in 2025. So I think it is also reasonable for like Carney to seek like allies around the world. And in terms of the CPI, like how the inflation is doing, I think Carney is handling quite well. Like the inflation is not as high as those in the United States, and the standards of living has been quite I would say stable. So I guess this is another reason why Carney is able to maintain a steady amount of support, where like even I've said like Liberal has been in government for more than a decade, and there is still such amount of support, and I think it's really like a good job for them. And in terms, I think though the two other main reasons why like Liberal can maintain the support is about like Carney's, as we've been discussing, like his foreign policy and his foreign involvement. Yes, he's been like visiting literally like tons of countries around the world. Yeah, and this is only for the country he has been visiting. I think there's also like trade deals with India and other countries where Carney has not like personally visited. So he is really like, I think to a certain extent, like foreign policy is, as other leaders does, an instrument for him to maintain support. But in the case, like he is having a foreign policy that basically like oppose Trump and boycott Trump and to like promotes the sovereignty and autonomy of Canada in order to make a stand in the domestic policy and politics, and I think that's definitely reasonable. Okay, yeah. So I think another thing that we have to like notice is that actually I think the Carney government has been shifting towards the right to a certain extent. Like I've been browsing through Carney's like Carney's premiership like Wikipedia page, and this is all I got. It's like he is certainly like reversing and some of like Trudeau era's environment policy, like the EV mandate, and I also think the carbon tax, but I think the carbon tax is maybe a state thing, but I'm not sure. And also like the oil pipeline thing, yeah. As for immigration, like Trudeau, sorry, like Carney has definitely also taken a more conservative stance, like limiting immigration. So in terms of like social aspect, he is definitely more conservative, and he has also, as far as I'm concerned, be cutting the tax rate of like the corporates and the high earners. So although it is mainly for like to attract business and other stuff, I think it's like economically another right shift, rightward shift for the liberal government. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I personally, I'm honestly, I don't really know what he's doing domestically, but from his speech and from his vibes and from what he's been doing, like internationally, I do quite like Carney, and also like some of his videos on Instagram. I think they're quite good, and also some of his mottos, like elbows up and Canada strong. I think they have like a very good uniting effect. Like I would feel
yeah.
proud if I were Canadian, even though I'm not. So I think Carney's been doing a good job, and I like him quite a bit. I think he's a very pragmatic and realistic leader with quite a bit of ability. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
even considering like looking more deeply into Canadian colleges like Toronto and
Okay.
McGill and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the main message from this slide is that Carney is taking a more centrist approach, and I haven't seen like other like prominent like social like policy that is normally like you would consider a left winger to do like those like promoting like minorities right, especially those gender issues. I'm not seeing Carney doing a whole lot on those issues, I'm saying. Yeah.
And I think he
So
has like more on his plate.
yeah, so I think this also ties into how the like the 2025 Canadian federal elections go out. Yes, I think a lot of media has been like focusing on how like liberal managed to maintain their minority government, their plurality in the parliament, which I also think is a huge takeaway. But I also want to like show how this is actually a kind of a right wing shift for the Canada. So for the first place, like conservatives like post increase outnumber liberal, and yeah, that's the first thing. I think conservative gained like 24 seats and liberal like 13 or something like that. Yeah. And another thing is that a lot of like liberals gain is from the New Democratic Party, which is like a more socialist, more left-wing party. There's the liberals, and a lot of liberal gains has also been from Bloc Quebec, which is a nationalist, but again, it's a really
Yeah.
left-wing, at least social and economic issues in terms of Canadians. Those constituencies, the constituencies that used to vote for like Bloc Quebec and New Democratic went to liberal rather than those who for conservatives went to liberal. So in the general term, I would still like phrase this election as a right-wing shift toward yeah,
Mhm.
but it is not the kind of right-wing shift that we are seeing that can like put like conservative on the chair, because there is the threat of Trump, and yeah, there is a point that like can Canadians want to like vote for liberal to like stop maybe um like just to offset the Trump effect, I guess. Yeah, and I guess that's also a point.
I think before Carney became leader of the Liberal Party and before Trump started putting tariffs on Canada, the conservatives were like running away with the election in the polls, like because
Yeah, yeah, way
the
away.
The Canadians were really fed up with Trudeau. But I think on one hand, Carney showed that he was, a decent, stable leader, and on the other hand, uh, I mean, like, and more poised and more able to help Canada react to Trump. And on the other hand, I think Pierre Poilievre, he was a little right, and he was a little. I think he was framing himself kind of like Canada's Trump, so the Canadians didn't really like him, and he lost the election. But
Yeah,
because
yeah. I think there are two forces like playing in the election. One is that Liberal has been the government of Canada for so long, and there's understandably some like people like going shifting towards the right, and there's also the Trump effect that brings people away from the Conservative Party. So yes, at the end, yeah, Liberal did maintain their seat in the government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think another takeaway from this map is basically like how like many like especially I will argue like Western democracies has been seeing like increasingly significant like cleavages in the city that more educated and populated, densely populated area tend to vote for parties that are more like culturally left wing, and like more rural areas are tend to vote for conservative parties. And yeah, I think this is a trend that we've been seeing in a lot of countries, not only like US but also Canada and kind of like also France, I think to a certain extent, and certainly Germany. But yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I used to think but I think like a few years ago, the left wingness of these large cities were what was like was more significant, but now these like cities are gradually turning slightly right as well. Like I think I don't know why, but I feel like 5 years ago, or not maybe around 5 years ago, like major cities in the US were all very, very blue, but now they've turned slightly Republican, like slightly more right. I don't know. I think
I think maybe that's true, but like I think the difference between like rural and city is still very, very
yeah,
significant.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's always been very salient.
Yeah. Maybe Trump did tend to attract some of the more corporate guys, and I also think Latino do play a certain part, and how like Democrats have been like losing the minorities vote, not only for I think not only for Latinos, but also more prominently for Asians as well. Yeah, I've actually heard of an anecdote about the 2016 election. It's about my mom's coworkers who are in the Silicon Valley, and they said they were like voting for Trump, which yeah,
Yeah,
they were
actually,
used they were used
I
to be
was
Democrat voters. Yeah.
yeah, I was in the US at that time, and like friends around us, they said that they were going to vote for Trump because Hillary was very anti-China, and I was like, okay, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was also like Asians are also I think like mostly in the 2016 election. And I
Yeah,
do think that Asian and Chinese are a bit more conservative on like at least social issues than other ethnic groups. So
yeah, I think going back to my point about like a very slight rightward shift, not a rightward shift, like more moderate or more
mhm.
toward the center than 5 years ago. I think it's also because like intellectuals gradually realized that uh some ideologies and some ideas from the left were slightly radical, so they kind of moved slightly toward the right, toward the center. But yeah, that's not really important.
Yeah, I think they do make sense because maybe I would argue that we have seen less progressive like movements like compared to a few past years. So yeah, I do think
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay, so discussion section.
I think we actually touched on quite a few of these questions in like our previous discussion already.
Mhm.
Um, I think we didn't like. I think um about the speech. I think it was a good speech. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually want to do a quick takeaway, or at
Mhm.
least my takeaway from the speech.
Okay.
Wait, let me just go back to the slides.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think what Canada is doing right now, I think what the Carney is, at least my interpretation of the speech is that I think the rules-based international order has not been like really like upheld for the last 20 years or like 30 years. I think rule-based international order is inherently flawed and not really like respected. But it is this time that Trump decided to violate the rule-based international order in such a way that like liberal countries such as Canada, such as those in Europe, are actually harmed rather than like let's say like 10 years ago like or 20 years ago Trump decided to invade Iraq and basically nobody cared about like how Iraq is faring. Yes, rule-based order is being violated, but frankly, like politicians in Canada or like politicians in Europe don't care much. But this time, I think it is like rule-based international orders are being violated to the cost of those middle powers. So that's why they are being protesting against a Trump speech. So that's my interpretation of the speech. So I will argue that to a certain extent, that Carney is still like a little bit of like hypocritical, but that's my argument. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all the Western countries, if you look at it from like this standpoint, the double standards, like they didn't care what happened to Iraq, but now it's happening to Greenland, or like Greenland's being threatened, so they're all up in arms. It does show the hypocrisy and double standards of these Western countries. I think another thing is what was I going to say? Hmm. Uh oh yeah, I think if you look at it from US foreign policy standpoint, I think it was quite wise what they were doing in the past, like generally upholding the rules-based world order, and only um disobeying it from time to time when it was necessary, and being very careful not to infringe upon the interests of their allies in Europe and also more powerful countries, like I would say China, more or less.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe not China, but at least their allies. But what Trump has done, he's just gone at their allies, and that's obviously hurt the rules-based world order that I think profited the United States, but I'm not like sure about that.
Yeah, but I
But I think
would
it's
argue that like whether it's from the first Trump administration, from the COVID, or from this Trump administration, that I do think like U.S. politics and the foreign politics of the international world has had a significant change that could be called rupture. I think that's correct.
mm,
I think from a historical perspective, it will be like two era. One would be like pre-COVID or like pre-Trump era, and one would be post-Trump era. I think there are still like significant differences between the practices of foreign policy. Yeah.
that's a good point, but I was too young before Trump, so I don't really know much. Uh,
Mm.
yeah. Then he has found his way into the history books, which is what he wants. Um, values based realism. I think it's an S is missing. I'm not sure. I think an S is missing. Anyway, about this values based realism, I think it was initially it was initially coined by the Finnish president or prime minister, the
Yeah.
Finnish leader. Um, well, I think it's a pretty nice term.
Yeah, I think it's really like easy to comprehend. Like you put realism like after value space, and yeah, people would know what this mean. Yeah.
I think the Finnish leader has the potential to become a political scientist, or perhaps he is one. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think this kind of like sums up like what Carney is doing right now. Like there is part of realism where like he is seeking like economic like gains and economic cooperations abroad, and that might somehow like impair like his commitment to like sustainability or like human rights or all other stuff by cooperating with those countries. But I do think that he like generally still like upheld like the broad aspects, like the broad idea of like democracy and all those stuff. It is that they may become the second priority instead of first, like in his decision of foreign policies.
Yeah, I think he's trying to, help Canada survive and perhaps thrive while also trying to his best to stay true to his principles and values, which I think it's something that actually a lot of people do, a lot of leaders do, but also a lot of people do in their real life. They try to they try to stay true to their true selves and their beliefs and principles and dreams while also acquiescing slightly or accommodating slightly the harsh reality.
I think that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I will also argue that value-based realism is what the Western world has been practicing for the past decades. That I think that Carney has, yes, mentioned it. I will argue somehow. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I don't think I heard this phrase before, but
No,
this term
neither do
before.
I. But like from a retrospective, like
Yeah, maybe.
viewpoint, I
It
do think
actually,
that's also fitting like their past practices.
yeah, actually, if you think about it, it does sound rather hypocritical as well. But okay. Um. Uh. All right, I think the third question.
Mm,
I don't know if it's a question, but it's like I think what I meant initially by with this is how able do you think, or how much of a um yeah, I think, yeah, how able is a coalition of middle powers, for example, the European Union, Canada, um, and other various countries, able to um, hold its own or stand up to the two hegemons that Carney named in his speech, but more specifically, I would say the United States, that when they need to stand up to the United States, like for example, now.
I think like to begin with, like middle powers, it is a very like ambiguous term, and I think it could be discussed in depth. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure about like what does Carney mean by middle powers? Does he like mean for like Western middle powers, like the European Union, like Canada, and basically UK and possibly also Australia, and or liberal middle powers? Maybe we also like include Japan or maybe like Korea. I don't know, or maybe he just means middle power, which like again is like broadens the term. So yeah.
I think like I think his speech, like according to his this speech, I think it was more probably the relationship between Canada and Europe, which I think was mostly threatened by what's been happening going on. Like Trump threatened Canada and Trump threatened Greenland. So maybe this alliance, but also yeah, the definition or which countries are categorized as middle powers. I mean, there's no like definite conclusion on that. And I also read a article or an opinion on Fox News saying that
Mhm.
Canada is not a middle power, but like they responded to this speech and they basically said it was a terrible speech and everything. And I think one part of that article was that Canada is not a middle power, Canada is a small power, which was quite
Mm.
interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I personally do not think that like a really like a grand coalition of middle powers like going to work. I don't see like how like Japan or maybe like Canada and Brazil and South Africa and those countries could like have their interests work for the common interest. And I don't think that's actually possible. I
Mm,
mean, maybe it would be make some sense to do an economic like do some economic multilateral treaties, but from a strategic standpoint, maybe that's not the best move, I guess. But in terms of like Canada and European Union, kind of divided over there because I actually heard some talk about like Canada going to into the European Union. Also, I don't think that's going to happen. But
yeah, I think there was talk. I think they've joined a European military alliance, like the Baltics, like the Scandinavian states um plus Canada to protect Arctic security. I think in the past it was a very European organization, but then Canada joined. And I don't think they can join the European Union. They're not European, but like maybe they can, cooperate more.
yeah, I do think that if like Canada and European Union are like developing like kind of like a strategic or like militarily like alliance. Um, I would not say it's impossible, but like the current state of the fact is that without NATO, like European like military is still very fragmented. I would argue that. So I still argue that there's still a long way to grow. Go like especially I think like like the Western powers' defense is so like just dependent on the United States, and like in the short term, I do not see a way out of this, and in the long term, if like just hypothetically speaking, we have like maybe a Democrat president or a slightly more moderate Republican in terms of their foreign policies, maybe it would not like maybe worth it to do like a to like de-risk itself or like de-link itself with the United States. So that's what I view the fact.
Yeah, I think a goal now of the European Union and Canada is probably to be able to um like stand up and be powerful enough, be enough powerful to um deter the United States from like tariffing them or sanctioning them or threatening them in the future. I think that's probably a goal that these leaders have right now. Um, I mean, they probably hope never to have to use these capabilities, but I think they've realized the importance of having these capabilities and capacity to do so.
I do agree.
I think we can move on to
Yeah,
next. Yeah.
yeah. I actually do heard of an interesting alliance. I think it's about like Canada plus UK plus Australia plus New Zealand. So
Isn't that like the Five Eyes Alliance?
no, it's not. It's like a proposed, I think, economic like political one, like the European Union, but it's like former like from dependencies or like British Empire. Some like I would argue that yeah, developed like Commonwealth members.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The next question, China's role. I think undoubtedly China has gained from what Trump has been doing. Um, about its role, I think China's going to continue just keeping its head down and developing um as things play out on the other hemisphere, on like the other side of the world. Um, I I think it's a little like the American attitude at before the start and during at the very beginning of World War II, which was like
Mhm.
it's the Europeans issue. Like we're just going to keep our hands out of this um and just develop and just you know not engage unless necessary. Uh, which I mean I think I don't know, but I think maybe that's some of the policy that China has right now. I think one thing is that Chinese foreign policy is probably more coherent than American foreign policy because, um, there's a lot of 5-year plans and I think more general stability and leadership.
Yeah. I'm not really like familiar with like Chinese like foreign policy goals. So
Yeah, I'm
what
not
do you think?
really. Well, I'm not very familiar either, but I do know that China is pursuing a peaceful path of development. That's something I do know.
Yeah, I do think like Chinese foreign policy goal might be like less globalized. I think it is more regionalized development about like dealing with the conflicts and the relationship with its neighbors rather than on global scale. Yeah,
I think on a global scale, the only thing China wants to do right now is do business.
yeah, I do think like China is more concerned um with like its neighbors. So I do think like as long as like China like maintains like a stable relationship with the major powers so that it can do whatever it wants with its neighbors. So I think that's okay. I think that might be its goal.
Yeah, I think China, like for the time being at least, understands that uh, while it's a power, it's still not as powerful as the United States. So it still needs to develop a little, and a very important part of developing is keeping decent relations at least with the U.S. and Western powers because then they won't like sanction you and do stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
The impact of the
Mm.
speech. Actually, I think it's been like 20 days since he made the speech, and I don't
Mhm.
think there's been a very significant impact on the world. I think one thing though is that I think he did kind of embolden um Western leaders, like especially European ones, to kind of stand up against Trump. I think like Keir Starmer, he also started using kind of more like kind of stronger language. And I think the German chancellor also said that, it's important to I think defend Europe and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it did do some it had some uh, impact, and it was probably discussed in like the higher levels of especially European leadership. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think it's been as world changing as I don't think
Maybe
it's yeah.
yeah, maybe it did boost his popularity, I would argue, and that's also
Yeah,
important for
certainly.
him at least. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. His popularity, at least for his popularity here, for me it has increased, even though I don't think
So
that's
good.
going to help him at home. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
The last thing, though, the Greenland episode. What did you mean by this?
Um, just like comment on like the whole like Greenland episode that basically like happened
Oh,
after like the Venezuela episode. I would argue I think like many politicians and people like were genuinely like thinking that maybe like Greenland, like, maybe like America was like actually like getting Greenland after what they did to like Maduro. So
mm. Yeah, I think the Greenland episode. I don't know if Trump was initially serious about getting Greenland or not. I think maybe a little. I think he wanted to test like how far he could get and how much he could get away with.
mhm.
But I think it did show him that, and also the world, that there are still limits to his power. I think he eventually did back down on like acquiring Greenland by
Yeah.
force, and I don't know if it was like his like tactic to like initially not take that off the board and to have people have to negotiate for that so he could like get a more advantageous deal. But I think certainly it has shown that he has certain limits. For example, I think and there isn't really much talk about Greenland now. I think he's perhaps kind of dropped it, though even
Hmm.
maybe
Maybe he'll
discussions.
mention it
Yeah,
like
again sometime.
one yeah, maybe 1 year later, like just like he did like at the inauguration and like at the December of 2025. Yeah, that's what
Mhm.
happens.
Maybe like 7 months from now, they're going to say, "Oh, we have a deal on Greenland."
Yeah,
But I
maybe
think,
like yeah, 8 months from now, like Trump will be again like we'll like Canada will be like the 51st state or something like that. Who
yeah,
knows? Yeah.
maybe. But I think, yeah, to finish my point on like the limits that this showed, because I listened to a podcast on this, and I think they
Mhm.
said that quite a few factors contributed to him backing down. One was the Europeans; they had a pretty strong stance, and even though Trump, I don't think he has much respect for Europe. He has to realize that the European market, the European Union, still has some market power. And another thing is the stocks were tumbling because of what he was saying. I think this also played a role. And
Mhm.
also, I don't think domestically he had great support for threatening Greenland. And I think this also, to an extent, reined in his actions. So it shows that, he does still have restriction. There are still things that can restrict him and his power.
Yeah, yeah. I do think like Trump is a very pro business and pro corporate president per se,
Yeah, of
mainly
course.
because I think there's certainly like personal ties between him and the business world. So yeah, I think that goes like with the same way with the liberation tariff episode where the like the stock market basically like plunges and he decided to back off a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should continue.
Yeah.
This is the last slide.
Last slide for this podcast. I
Uh-huh.
think, yeah, other things at Davos. One thing at Davos was, of course, Trump's Board of Peace,
Mhm.
which I don't think we've heard much about now, but
Yes.
it was a pretty big thing from him. And I mean, I don't think many people have very high praise or very positive view of this organization. I don't think it's really going to be able to do much because the countries that are involved apart from the United States, I don't think there's a very influential country in the Board of Peace. I am pretty curious about whether or not they paid the 10 million or 10 billion fee to enter, because if they did, then Trump just earned a lot of money.
Yeah. I do think this. Yeah. I do think this kind of reflect like I do think a quite interesting trend where like Trump is like constantly like aiding other like right wing like leaders and parties abroad, like, and I think this is where like those payback actually when like I don't think like payback is substantial, but just in terms of the popularity like he receives from those right-wing leaders from LA, from Argentina, and from those from Hungary, which is like notoriously right-wing populist and kind of authoritarian leader Orban. Yeah, and I do think this is an interesting trend going on where like there's like more like globalized and like more interaction between like parties with similar ideologies, but it's like international cross-border is kind of like communist international, I will argue. Maybe it's a bad analogy, but whatever.
Yeah, I think he started this. Oh, I think there was an analogy in the Chatham House in the Chatham House podcast, and they said that organization is like a golf club without golf. And I think the point that they were trying to make is that it's just like kind of a place where Trump can chill with some of his allies and just kind of. Oh, another thing they pointed out was that it's like it looks like a global South support group for Donald Trump, or like a retirement job, because he probably
Yeah.
can't run a third time. At least it's going to be rather difficult in the United States, but he's going to be permanent president of this organization. So it's like kind of something he'll get to do after he gets retired.
Yeah.
And it's probably not going to be able to like create any real impact on the world, like make peace in Gaza and like not Greenland, but like Ukraine. Probably not going to be able to do much. I think Elon Musk, he also said that, is it Board of Peace or is it Board of Peace, like PIECE? A
Right,
piece of
funny.
yeah, a piece of Greenland, a piece of Venezuela. That was quite interesting. Actually, I don't think we've heard much on Venezuela recently as well.
Yeah, I think what's going on actually?
I don't know. I mean, are they pumping oil? I'm not sure.
Maybe
Um,
not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the last point that I would like to make is, its comparison with the United Nations and the future of the United Nations, which I think we talked about before. I don't really have much hope in the United Nations as an organization. But the logos, there's a comparison, and it's really like the Board of Peace logo is just really the United Nations logo, but he changed it so that the center, like the only continent there, is North America and some part of South America. While on the United Nations logo, it's like the world, and like on his
Yeah.
logo, it's North America, which is like, oh, okay,
Yeah, it's kind of like more symbolic of like the power structure at World Peace. And I also kind of think like the World Peace in part of like motivated by somehow like Trump hatred towards United Nations, or like his
yeah,
refusal of a rule-based international order, and he tries to replace it by an international border like that is dominated by himself, where he is the sole leader and can appoint the next one.
yeah. It's also like a good way to get him into the history books.
Yeah, maybe. If that works, yeah, definitely. But I'm not very optimistic about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, is that about it for this part of the podcast? Maybe we'll be
Yeah.
discussing other things at Davos later, but or maybe not. But I think that's it for
Yeah,
today.
I think that's all for today, and thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening. It's already tomorrow, actually.